Okay, hello there Hollows and welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to be ranking every single one of the bosses in Dark Souls 2 from worst to best. Now, as I always say in these videos, except for the last one for some reason, this is my opinion. So if there's a boss at the bottom of the list that you really like, or there's a boss at the top of the list which you really don't like, it's just opinions. So don't get all crazy in the comments below. I always say this and people do anyway. It's like they don't understand the concept of opinions. But anyway, additionally, because currently I'm looking after a partner who's got, injured and everything, as I've said many times, the editing in this video is not going to be quite up to standard. I'm just going to have the bosses' names on screen because of time constraints and all sorts of stuff. So it's the only way I can get this video out in a somewhat timely manner. So at number 41, we have Prowling, Magus, and Congregation. This boss... It's not even a boss. I don't even really need to explain why this is so low at the list. It's a room full of enemies. It's not even a boss. At number 40, we have the Grave Robber, Ancient Soldier, and Old Explorer, or as many people call them, the Gank Squad. This is basically 3 NPCs, and fighting it solo, you just have to run around in circles and slowly try and whittle them down by getting hits every time you see a window opportunity. And playing this fight with friends is... it's just like an NPC fight, really. Again, it's a boss which shouldn't be called a boss. At number 39, we have the Royal Rat Vanguard. This is the one where you've got one rat amongst loads of other rats, which is the boss rat. You got to find which rat is the real rat. It's, again, a room full of enemies. At number 38, we have the Giant Lord. The reason why this is so low is actually because it's a reskin of the Last Giant. That's the only reason why it's so low. I wouldn't have it so low because the boss is actually okay, but because it's reusing another boss, it automatically means it lacks some sort of originality. And getting all the giant souls, really, none of them are really that entertaining. I'm not the biggest fan of any of them. At number 37, we have the Blue Smelter Demon. This is the regular Smelter Demon. The regular Smelter Demon is much higher on the list, but the Blue Smelter Demon is so low because it's just taking a boss which is already good, giving it bullshit hitboxes and way more health and deal way more damage, and that's it. It's a reskin of a boss, so it loses points, and additionally, the hitboxes are broken and the health is tanky, and this fight is just not good at all. And the run-up to this boss as well is an absolute pain in the ass. At number 36, we have the Twin Dragonriders. Again, you'll notice a common theme here that bosses which are just reusing other bosses automatically lose points, and I don't really like them as much. It's an issue I have with Elden Ring, and Dark Souls 2 is the first time we really see something like this in the Souls series. The Twin Dragonriders is not just one Dragon Rider, it's now 2, except one of them has a bow at the start before he comes down to start attacking you properly. The idea is okay. They do have slightly different movesets because one of them has a bow at the start, but then when they come down, it's very similar. Again, it's not really much to write home about. At number 35, we have the Covetous Demon. The Covetous Demon is like the story of this guy is literally that he ate so much he just became a giant fat slog. Basically, the lore is stupid, the design is stupid, the moves are stupid. Yeah. At number 34, we have Lud and Zullen, the King's Pets. Now, the fight here is something that I actually think could be okay with a few tweaks. The issue is, number 1, I am including boss run-ups here, because this boss run-up absolutely destroys this boss fight. It absolutely ruins it, because you have to battle through the frigid outskirts every single time you want a chance at fighting these guys. It absolutely ruins the entire boss fight, because you know that if you die, you got to run through all that again to get another attempt, and it absolutely damages this boss fight. But the fight itself is okay. I don't mind it. The two tigers are balanced pretty well against each other, and the fact that when one of them's dead, the other one sort of buffs up a bit. I like that gimmick. It works pretty well. It means that you want to try and defeat both of them at the same time. I like it. But unfortunately, it's reusing aspects of another boss, and the massive boss run-up means that that's why it's at number 34. Number 33, we have the Belfry Gargoyles, a very poor attempt to recreate a great moment from the original Dark Souls. Again, they're reusing the boss music, they're reusing the gimmick, but again, they don't understand what made the original Bell Gargoyle so good. And that's because it was essentially a damage per second check. It's a DPS check. So therefore, if you have enough damage to pass a certain point in the game, so if you upgrade your weapons enough, you'll manage to get past the Bell Gargoyles no problem. But here, they're just throwing a million gargoyles at you all at once and saying, fuck it. And I really don't like it. It's a poor imitation of the original, which is far better. At number 32, we have the Pursuer. The Pursuer, I like the idea of the Pursuer, and in my Dark Souls 2 analysis video, I did say that he didn't come back all throughout the game. He actually does, it's just that I happen to not encounter him on my playthroughs. I personally think they should have had 2 boss fights with the Pursuer. I know I say I'm not a fan of reusing boss fights, but I think the Pursuer could have been a nice exception where they give him a different moveset every time you fight him and have it so it actually is the same enemy each time you fight him, but almost like phases in Resident Evil. You got the Pursuer phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I really would like that, but what I find weird with the Pursuer fight is you have a boss fight with him earlier in the game, but then you fight him again later in the game, and it's just like, it sort of takes away from the first boss fight, especially because there's a way to cheese him built into the arena. So unfortunately, for those reasons, that's why it's lower in the list. At number 31, we have the Last Giant. Now, this is a boss fight where I don't mind it. I actually think the boss fight's alright, but it's just that it's a very easy boss fight, so it's not really much to write home about, is it really? It's something that, it's like the Asylum Demon. I'm never going to have the Asylum Demon as one of my favourite bosses because it's the tutorial boss. It's okay, it does its job well, and that's why it's at 31 rather than being at 41. It does its job okay, and the ones after this I'd say are okay boss fights. I don't hate them, but they're not fantastic, and they're not terrible. So at number 30, we have the Old Iron King. This is almost like the ceaseless discharge of Dark Souls 2, as I said in my previous easiest to hardest video. But again, visually, he looks really good. But the boss fight itself plays out like a boss fight you could really see being in like Arkham Asylum or any other modern game, like a Gears of War game or something like this. It plays out in a traditional video gamey boss battle way, and I don't like that because Dark Souls is usually better than that. So that's why it's at 30. At number 29, we have the Royal Rat Authority, which is like Dark Souls 2's version of Sith. And the problem with this boss fight, which brings it down so much, is because of the toxic inflicting rats at the start. That's the main issue with this fight. You take them out of the equation, you got a decent boss fight. It's not too hard, not too easy, but it's just decent. But unfortunately, adding in those toxic rats is what brings it down, because that adds this whole new frustrating gimmick and infuriating aspect to the fight, which doesn't really need to be there, and it's just Dark Souls 2 doing difficulty for the sake of difficulty. At number 28, we have the Ancient Dragon. This boss fight, I think, could have been really good. It could have been something epic. You could have had this epic fight where if you want to take on this dragon, you're in this awesome, almost cloud-looking arena. Yeah, I imagine this boss fight, if it was done nowadays, it would have almost like a Nameless King type of arena where you're in the clouds and everything, and you got this almost everlasting stretch of terrain which you can fight him on, and he's got some awesome moves and stuff. But the Ancient Dragon, unfortunately, its AI is really easy to exploit, and he's got that much health. He degrades your weapons like crazy. And unfortunately, I think if the Ancient Dragon had a quarter of its health, well, not a quarter, a third of its health, I think this fight could actually be good. Because then it wouldn't become an endurance test. It would just be you'd have to actually, maybe if you had a couple more moves as well, this fight could be much higher. But unfortunately, the AI is too easy to exploit, and he has too much health, and that just brings him down massively. At number 27, we have Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. Now, this boss fight is too easy, which is the problem with it, really. It's literally the final boss you'll ever fight in the game, and it's the last boss of a 3-part fight with Thronewatcher and Defender, and Nashandra, and then Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. But the problem is, he's just too easy, and I get they probably wanted to make him easier because you could potentially have to fight the Thronewatcher and Defender and then Nashandra before it. But the problem is, it still has that title of being the last boss that you will fight in Dark Souls 2 if you go for the Scholar of the First ending. And having him be so easy is just, especially because they advertise it as being a new boss when the Scholar of the First edition of the game came out, it's just, I'm not the biggest fan, personally. It's too easy, and he doesn't even move. He's just sort of like this stationary blob in the middle of the arena, and no one likes a random stationary blob. So at number 26 we have the Guardian Dragon. Now this boss almost has the opposite problem of the Ancient Dragon. The Ancient Dragon had too much health, and the Guardian Dragon probably has too little. He's way too easy. He doesn't do that much damage. You can get past him ridiculously quickly, and this same enemy is then reused as regular enemies in the Dragon area, which we'll be getting to straight after this. So why is he the Guardian Dragon? Why is he special? Why does he get a boss bar? I don't get it. It's weird. Anyway, next we have Arva the King's Pet, which is the better version of Lud and Zahn, the King's Pets, because they're just reusing the Arva fight. I like the gimmick that the boss is invisible. I've never actually managed to kill it when it's invisible, but I wonder if speedrunners... I know speedrunners might not do the DLC, but if you had a speedrun or boss run, I wonder if speedrunners will do this fight invisible. I wonder if that's actually something people do, or is it just too hard? I don't know. It'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? If you could sort of abuse the AI a little bit and get it into a corner so you know where it's always going to be, even if it's invisible. But anyway, that's going on a bit of a tangent. This boss is pretty cool. It's like the Royal Red Authority, but done better. And I would have had this boss higher on the list, but I do like certain aspects of some of the other ones more. Despite the fact that I'd say this is probably a better actual fight than some of the others, but the other bosses, I think, have maybe a better design or better gimmicks or things like that to them. So that's, I feel like I have to say that to preface the next one, which is 24, the Demon of Song. Now, I know the Demon of Song is not a very good fight, really. It's very easy, very predictable, and you can really rush past it really easy. But you have to give it points for creativity, I think, here. The boss is definitely unique looking. It's like a condom toad with an old woman's head. And who would have ever thought of that? Like putting a condom on a toad and then peeling back the condom reveals the head of an old lady. Who would have thought of that, really? But that's still the gimmick of this boss fight. So there we go. And I think visually, you have to give this boss fight points. Like it's unique. It stands out. And when it's one I always remember when I think of Dark Souls 2. I think of how the Demon of Song looks. Well, not only that, I think of like the Fume Knight, Mytha the Baneful Queen, other cool designs of bosses as well. But this is definitely one I think of. At number 23, we have the Duke's Dear Freja. Now, this is like the Armor Spider, but I do really like the gimmick of it having the two heads. I think that's a pretty cool gimmick, and it makes the boss fight play out in a unique way, which is something you have to give the boss fight points for, really. Is it plays out in this unique way where you're running from one head to the other, and I can't think of any other boss fight in any Souls game which plays out in that kind of way. So I'm giving this boss fight points in that respect, creativity. And I think it's not as fun as the Armor Spider, but the Armor Spider is the Armor Spider is in Demon Souls. I suppose it is better, probably. Yeah, it's better, but this is it has a unique twist on that same fight, which is why it's sort of middle of it's mid tier, isn't it? Really. Next, we have Mytha the Baneful Queen, which is one that I hate putting in the middle of the pack, really, because this is one where the design of the boss is awesome. I really like the design of Mytha. But the problem is number one, having to burn that random piece of cotton to remove the poison pit. I mean, that makes no logical sense. So we have to lose points for that. But then also the boss is way too easy. It's ridiculously easy, and in my playthrough, I beat her on New Game Plus difficulty on my first playthrough, by burning a bonfire ascetic to get extra souls, and I don't like. It's just too easy. And that's the biggest issue, because this boss fight could be awesome. I love the gimmick of her carrying around her head, and then she throws her head at you for an attack, and then you've got to try and get the head back. It's really cool, but it's just too easy, unfortunately. Next, at number 21, we have the Red Smelter Demon. Now, the Red Smelter Demon looks really cool. It's definitely a Dark Souls 2 boss. It has that kind of Dark Souls 2 aesthetic and charm, which I like in this regard, because Dark Souls 2, sometimes the visuals are a bit weird in Dark Souls 2, and I don't think they fit in with the other games in the FromSoftware catalogue. But the Red Smelter Demon, it's definitely a Dark Souls 2 boss, but I like the design, I like the gimmick, and I like how the boss plays out. The only thing I don't like is that if you get too close to it, you can take damage when it's buffed up towards the end of the boss fight. I don't like that, how you take damage when you're close to the boss. That's something that's also done in a boss in Bloodborne, the Blood-Starved Beast. You get poisoned when you're close to it. I don't like that gimmick at all, because you have to get close to the boss to deal damage to it, so why are you punishing the player for actually, fighting the enemy that you have to fight to get through the game? It doesn't make any logical sense. But I like the boss overall, it's just the other ones after this are generally better. Then we have the Skeleton Lords. The Skeleton Lords, I give the Skeleton Lords points mainly for the being different and trying something different in a way that I think works. This is almost like a trial for the Deacons of the Deep. I think that's the name of them. Deacons of the Deep? I think that's what they're called in Dark Souls 3. I may be getting the name wrong. But this is almost like a trial for Deacons of the Deep in a way, when it's got that kind of gimmick where you've got loads of enemies you've got to fight, you've got to focus on certain ones that are in the pack, but those ones do have more health and they do have certain specific attacks which make them feel like bosses, as opposed to Prowling Magus in Congregation, when they literally are just all random enemies. But I think the Skeleton Lord, it does something different, and I like the way it's approaching it, and I like the fact that it's trying to do something different with a traditional boss fight, because you have to have these kind of bosses which are different to make the more traditional boss fights like the Fume Knight and Valstat and other ones like the Lost Sinner. To make those ones stand out more, you need bosses like this, which are more gimmick bosses or ones that change things up a little bit. You need these ones to make the other ones shine. So I appreciate this boss for trying something different. At number 19, we have the Rotten. Now, what do I like about the Rotten? Why is the Rotten above the Red Smelter Demon? Why is the Rotten above the Guardian Dragon? Or ones like that? Well, the reason why is because the Rotten is very much like I think it's almost because it reminds me of like the Leechmonger and the other one. What's the other one called now in Demon Souls? I can't remember. But it reminds me of that. I like the arena. I also kind of like the design a little bit. It kind of looks like a mud monster, but I like the way they've done it. He has this kind of creepy aesthetic to him, and I think the boss fight, it's easy if you know its attacks, but it does actually do quite a bit of damage. So I'm only saying this to justify the fact that I died several times to him in my recent playthrough, because I kind of don't want people to think I'm stupid, because I died to him so many times in that playthrough. But anyway, he's not bad, and I think the Rotten gets quite a bit of stick for being very easy. He's like the Covetous Demon. I know he doesn't have much health, but the difference is his attacks do a lot of damage, and I think his arena is pretty cool. The design's okay, and I think generally he's still middle of the pack. Like, this is still mid-tier to me, but I think the ones after this are probably higher mid-tier, but this is still sort of the lower mid, generally medium mid-tier. Anyway, at 18 we have Elana the Squalid Queen. This is still, like I said, this is upper mid-tier in a way. So this is upper mid-tier now, because Elana, I like her gimmick, but I still hate the fact that she can resurrect Valstat. Despite the fact that that does make the fight easier. A lot of people, this is the thing, I said this in my easiest to hardest ranking, a lot of people think that when Elana summons Valstat, it makes the fight bullshit and way too hard and blah 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 blah. But I think they're fighting it wrong. They're playing the fight completely differently. Because when she summons in Valstat, that's your chance to run away from Valstat, constantly dodges attacks, because then Elana goes on the defensive, which means that you can spend way more time attacking her if you don't focus on Valstat. Ignore Valstat, just run away from him and focus on fighting Elana. And I think if you do that, even when she summons in the skeletons and the other creatures that she summons in, If you ignore them and focus on fighting Elana, this fight's easy. I've defeated Elana on my first or second attempt every time I've fought her. She's not that hard at all, but some people seem to think that she's very difficult. But I understand some people find certain things harder than others. But generally, I think her design's pretty cool. Despite the fact that the game's ripping off the Skyrim wall, it's still a pretty good fight overall. It's, yeah, well, not good. It's decent to good. At number 17, we have Scorpioness Nadjka. Now, the reason why Scorpioness Nadjka gets points is because of the fact that she's topless. No, it's not. It's because of the fact that her moveset and the gimmick of her going underneath the sand does make the fight play out in a somewhat decent way. And the fact you've got the stone which you can stand on in the middle of the arena to avoid her attacks when she goes underneath the sand. I like the gimmick. Again, it's trying something different, despite the fact that it is reusing the same concept that we had before with Quelaag. I still like the idea. I think it plays out quite nicely, and it's a different kind of fight. Trying something different is something that I do appreciate in Dark Souls 2, and because the game has that many bosses, I think it did need to try a lot of new things, and I think we've got to give it points for things like that. At number 16, we have Dragonrider. Dragonrider is just very much a standard medium boss, but for the part of the game it's in, I'd say it's a good fight. If you don't abuse the geometry and get him to fall to his death and just jump off the side, he is a decent fight for that start of the game. And I think if he's the first boss that you fight in Dark Souls 2, it's a good opening boss. It's a good way to open up the game and start the game. He's a decent sword and shield opponent. You can dodge his attacks nicely, and it's a good introductory mechanic for the player to get used to those kind of opponents, which you're going to be facing a lot of in Dark Souls 2. Then we have old Dragonslayer, who can ironically also be the first boss you fight in the game, if you want to. He's a bit harder though, which is why he's above the Dragonrider, because I like the challenge. But the main reason why I put old Dragonslayer above Dragonrider is because I like the lore which Dark Souls 2 is going for here. Now, it was retroactively changed or retconned in Dark Souls 3 when Miyazaki decided to change his lore his own way, which I understand. But to me, I view Dark Souls 2 as almost like its own universe. Dark Souls 2 is one sequel to Dark Souls 1, and then Dark Souls 3 is another sequel to Dark Souls 1. But they're in their own universes, if you understand what I mean. So, in the Dark Souls 2 universe, this is the real Ornstein. This is the real Ornstein who is now using dark magic, and he's tainted by dark magic. But then, the one that we fought in Dark Souls 1 was an illusion created by Guinevere. I like this lore. I really like it, and I think it enhances the fight. Because he's supposed to be, and it makes sense that he's easier than the original Ornstein as well, because he's old, he's been living here for hundreds of years now, and he's past his time. He's the old Dragonslayer, hence why it's called the old Dragonslayer, duh. So, I like it. I like the lore, and I think it enhances the fight. It makes it, like, the fact that he's easier, it makes sense in the story. And it also makes sense that it's opening boss, but yeah, I like it. I just generally like all parts of this fight. Yes, he's reusing the same moveset as Ornstein, but there's nothing wrong with that. In this kind of, this is fan service that I like, because it's fan service which works in the story, and it kind of it's using the basis of the first game and just enhancing it a little bit here and there, and it's not overly relying on it, which I like. Dark Souls 2 is still its own game in its own way. It has loads of its own things it does, but it's just a little bit of, you know, a little bit of hinting at what was before. At 14 we have Nashandra. Now, Nashandra, I like the Nashandra fight, but the reason why it's at 14 instead of being higher is because of the constantly annoying curse mechanic, where it reduces your health constantly over and over and over again, until you just want to slit your wrists and let yourself bleed to death in the bathtub instead of constantly going through that. But forgetting all of that, it's if she doesn't constantly use the curse mechanic to really piss you off, the fight can be enjoyable, and it's a decent way to finish the game. I appreciate the way in which it's a tough fight, but I like that it's sort of like, this is the real Nashandra. The Nashandra you saw earlier looked like this decent looking queen who was sitting on the throne, but this is what she's really like. She's this evil cursed demon, and I like The design, I think, is a cool design. Looks pretty creepy. I like the cutscene when she waves a scythe at you. It looks pretty cool. But for me, the curse mechanic is really what lets it down. That's the main reason why it's at 14 instead of being higher. 13, we have Sir Alonne. Now, this is controversial. I know. Don't dislike the video. I know. We all like the Sir Alonne fight. It's a good fight. It has to lose points because of the incredibly frustrating run-up. The boss run to Sir Alonne's boss room is just frustrating as all hell. And I know maybe I shouldn't move the boss fight down in the list because of this, but it is something you have to consider when you fight the boss, because unless you're doing a boss rush mod, you have to get through that run to the boss room every single time you want to fight Sir Alonne, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to run through all that every time I want to fight the boss. It's frustrating. I don't want to do that. So unfortunately, it means I don't fight Sir Alonne as much as I would like to, because I have to get through that all the time, which is just needlessly frustrating. And yeah, that's why it's 13. But the boss fight is still cool. I like the idea of this duel with him and all that. It's really cool. But unfortunately, it could have been better if they had a bonfire outside the room where you didn't have to go through that needlessly frustrating gauntlet of enemies every time you want to fight them. Just cut that all out. Just have it so you teleport into the memory and you're in the boss fight. Like, what's wrong with that? Anyway, at number 12, we had the Burnt Ivory King. Now, this definitely gets points for originality. There's no other boss fight in the entire Souls series which is like this, but you have this whole war setting. You've got the knights you've got fighting the knights that he's got, and then your knights run into the portals and block them off so the black knights can't come and attack you. That whole gimmick is really cool. And then afterwards the boss comes out, and then the fight is pretty good, but the only issue that I do have here, which brings down a little bit, is that you have that whole introductory section which lasts for a really long time, and you have to battle through that every time you want to fight the Burnt Ivory King. This fight did take me quite a while to do on my recent playthrough, because every time I wanted to get a chance to fight the Burnt Ivory King, I had to go through that whole war section, which is not easy. It consumes loads of your flasks, and then by the time you get to the Burnt Ivory King, you have less flasks, which means you have less time to get to grips with his moves and learn his moveset to be able to properly have a go at attacking him. At number 11, we have Sin, the Slumbering Dragon. Now, the thing with this fight is, okay, I hate the durability mechanic. I absolutely hate it. The fact that he has these attacks which drain the durability of your weapons, I hate it. I don't think it should be a thing in any Dark Souls game, because you should never want the player to compromise their build for the sake of being able to fight this one specific boss. But I still cannot take away from the fact that the fight is good. It's a good dragon fight. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'll say a different word. The scenic, amazing view of the dragon flying up in the air, doing his attacks and everything, and then coming down to attack you. It looks really cool. It's an awesome set piece, but it's just that one mechanic that brings him down. Otherwise, it'd be higher on the list, because I do really like this fight. It's just that brings it down. At number 10, we have the Executioner's Chariot. This boss would be so much lower if it didn't look really awesome. Like, there's no way of saying this is an awesome looking fight. The enemy just looks fantastic. And the whole gimmick of this being the undead purgatory, where the undead are teleported here to constantly get killed over and over again for all eternity by this chariot. I love that gimmick. It's really haunting and an awesome idea. The boss, I think when you understand that you have to defeat the necromancers to be able to defeat the Executioner's Chariot, that it works really well. Still though, the boss run-up is very frustrating, and that's why it loses points. Otherwise it would again be higher. But the boss run-up is really annoying. We're just saying Dark Souls 2 does a lot. And then, for me personally, I didn't know that the necromancers looked like they do in this game, so I didn't realize that certain enemies there were necromancers, and I was just trying to rush to the lever and trying to kill the skeletons. I wasn't focusing on the necromancers, so therefore the skeletons kept reviving themselves. But I'm not going to take away points for that, because that was my own stupidity, really, not realizing that the necromancers had a different design in this game. But anyway, the boss fight is still really good, and that's why it's number 10. Number 9, we have the Flexile Sentry. I love the design of the Flexile Sentry. I think it's an absolutely awesome design. The enemy, it looks really, really cool. I'm not taking away points because of the fact that the boss is reused later, even though I probably should, because it's annoying that they reuse it later and they just compromise the integrity of this boss for the sake of putting him in random places in the environment, but he looks really cool. And it's an awesome design, and the fight is really cool. It's an amazing gimmick that he has the 2 sides, and each different side of him has a different moves that you got to learn, and then he flips around. You got to try and, it's really cool. I love this boss fight. And number 8, we have Vendrick. Vendrick is weird, because if I'm going to include the fact that you have to get all the giant souls to really have a good chance fighting him, Vendrick would be like 25 or 26. But I'm trying to ignore all that and just focus on the boss fight itself. The boss fight itself, for lore reasons and visual reasons, is really cool. And the music is really haunting and chilling. Everything about this fight is really good. So I'm trying to forget about the fact you have to get all those giant souls. Because if I forget all that, Vendrick is at 8. But if I am accounting for all that, the boss fight is 25 or 26. Because I absolutely hate the fact you have to get all those souls. Every time you want a good chance of fighting him, you have to kill the Ancient Dragon to fight Vendrick. I don't want to kill the Ancient Dragon. I've done it once. I'm never going to do it again. Especially not on a Soul Level 1 playthrough. But anyway, Vendrick is at number 8. At number 7, we have the Looking Glass Knight. This is a perfect example of a visual design absolutely selling a boss. This fight, like, the boss looks amazing. It's a phenomenal design, an amazing outfit, an awesome looking visual, and when you're out there fighting in the rain, you've just fought through all of Drangleic Castle. This is the fight that waits you at the end. It's an amazing moment in Dark Souls 2. It could be my favorite moment in the game, to be honest. Like, just in terms of visuals and how awesome it is. You battle through Drangleic Castle. You see an awesome opponent waiting for you. It's a great feeling. And I love that fight. At number 6, we have the Ruined Sentinels, a fight that I used to not like when I first played Dark Souls 2. I didn't actually say this in my Let's Play. I did not like the Ruined Sentinels when I first played this game. But now I really do like the Ruined Sentinels, and I think it's actually an example of Dark Souls 2's mechanics working generally. Like, I think the life gem systems, even the combat, the slow pace of the combat, it all sort of comes together for the Ruined Sentinel fight. And I think it all works quite well. And I think this is an example of Dark Souls 2, especially its multiple enemy opponents philosophy of you fighting multiple enemies at once. This is, again, is an example of that working well and working to, the game's favour. And this is a very memorable fight. I enjoy the Ruined Sentinels, and I would go back to play Dark Souls 2, and I'd look forward to the Ruined Sentinels when I go back and play it. Another fight I look forward to is the Lost Sinner, which is at number 5, which is also in the Lost Bastille / Sinner's Rise. This fight's really cool as well. You light the torches, and then the boss looks really cool. When you have that chaos bug crawling into its eye socket, it's such a grotesque image, but it looks really cool. And the boss has an awesome visual design. The gimmick of it being blind as well works really cool. It is something they've used before in Demon Souls, but I think it's potentially done better here, to be honest. And I really like the design and everything about this fight. It's Dark Souls 2 again at its best. At 4, we have Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. Another very memorable fight in this game. Probably the best part of the final boss trilogy. Because the two enemies complement each other really well in another similar way to Ornstein and Smo, but I think it's done in a way that works here. It's not as good as Ornstein and Smo, but it's still a very good fight, and it's something that I'll remember, and it does cap off the game in quite a nice way. At number 3, we have Velstadt, the Royal Aegis. A cool design. Again, another example of the design, I think, selling it. It's a really awesome design. The idea that he has been standing, defending Vendrick this entire time, despite the fact that Vendrick's gone hollow. It's a cool lore. Yeah, it's really cool in the story as well. And I think, again, he's a bit too easy, unfortunately, but I'm not going to take points away because sometimes you don't need a boss fight to be hard. And when I first played Dark Souls 2, I actually did struggle with Velstadt, but now I defeated him my first go, like most bosses in Dark Souls 2. But it's a really good fight, and I think it's definitely one of the most memorable ones in the game. At number 2 we have Drangleic. Now, I was not sure whether I should put Drangleic this high because of the boss run-up, because I did take points away from bosses like Sir Alonne because of the run-up. But I think Drangleic is so good that it sort of makes me forget that. Also, I don't find the run-up as frustrating, because whereas with Sir Alonne, battling all of those enemies is an absolute chore. You have to play incredibly conservatively if you want to fight them every single time, because you have to try and conserve your life gems and your Estus flasks, and if you choose to run past them, you then also have to use your Estus flasks and your life gems, probably because you're going to get hit trying to run past them. Whereas with Drangleic, if you play quite conservatively, there are many strategies which I found when fighting Drangleic. I found multiple strategies where I could easily get through certain chasms of old without using any Estus flasks and any life gems at all. And I think that's the main reason why I have chosen to not punish the Drangleic fight for that, whereas I did with Sir Alonne, is because I had many strategies to get through without using any Estus flasks and life gems at all. And I think the way which I approached the Drangleic fight meant that, and the specific chasm which I chose to go through, I was very confident in getting through without really using Estus flasks and life gems. I had it pretty much down to a T when I finished it. But the fight especially is awesome. This fight is one of the best moments in all of Dark Souls 2. I think it's such an amazing design, one of the best designs in the entire Souls series. And it stands out in Dark Souls 2 as well. The design is awesome. And when it splits into two, that moment when you first see it split into two, you're thinking, oh shit, I thought I had this fight down. And then you see it splits into two. Now, the best strategy here is just to go to town when it splits into two, because when it first splits into two, if you have a weapon with a long sweeping attack, you can damage both of them at the same time and effectively get double damage, which is how I managed to defeat Drangleic in my playthrough, capitalizing on that moment. But the fight is really good. It's one of the best moments in this game, and the only issue is, again, how you have to get there. There's quite a few things you have to do to get to the Drangleic fight, but it's still worth it when you do. Number 1, the crowning jewel of Dark Souls 2 is the Fume Knight boss fight. I think everyone knew this was going to be number 1. It's a fantastic boss fight. It's amazing. It's essentially the Artorias of Dark Souls 2. It does take a lot of, things from that Artorias fight, which I suppose you could, mark it down for, but I think it still has a unique moveset. It still has unique timings. It has a unique combat pacing. Dark Souls 2's mechanics generally, things play differently. It's different enough to the point where I think it's its own boss fight. It stands on its own 2 feet as its own boss fight, and it's really cool. The only problem is getting through Broom Tower. I'm not a fan of the Broom Tower level, really. Once you get through that, you get one of the best bosses in the entire game at the end, which definitely makes it worth going through all of that to be able to get to this boss fight. It's amazing, it's challenging, it's by far the hardest fight in the game for me, but it's very rewarding, and it's fantastic when you get that moveset down and you feel like you really nailed it. It's that Dark Souls feeling, which can't be replicated in any other game for me personally. That feeling which I get with Artorias, I get with Fume Knight, I get with several other bosses in the series. It's fantastic, and it's definitely the crowning jewel of Dark Souls 2 in my opinion. So, let me know your own lists down in the comments below. I'm sorry this video isn't edited as well as some of my previous ranking videos, but like I said, I am tight for time. Recently I don't have much time, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe share this video with anyone who might enjoy it. If it was good enough, thank you again for watching. This is SoulReborn, signing out. Have a good one.